Joined here by Kerrie Dallman, who is the president of the Colorado Education Association, the state's largest teachers union. So how many teachers are you expecting at the Capitol over those 2 days?
Over the 2 days, I think close to 10,000 when you combine Thursday and Friday together.
When was the last time 10,000 teachers rallied at the state Capitol?
It's been a long time. I think the last time that ever may have occurred, no firm numbers, was when Amendment 23 was passed back in 2000.
What has people so motivated this year?
Nearly a decade of chronic underfunding of our public education system. The voters, when they passed Amendment 23 back in 2000, wanted investment in education to increase by inflation on an annual basis, and that has not happened since 2009. And I think what you're seeing is educators reaching the boiling point after, reaching into their own pockets to buy classroom necessities for students and for student learning.
So I think some people might have a little bit of a disconnect because you have teachers at the state capitol rallying for higher pay, yet unlike in some states, their pay isn't set there at the state capitol. Should it be in the future?
Well, first let me say this is about more than educator pay. This is about funding the entire system, and certainly educator pay is a piece of that. We have a statewide shortage of educators, and there's a reason for that. And that's partly driven by the salary components, but we also have districts who have been increasing their class sizes. Which means they're not hiring teachers. They've been limiting the types of classes students can take, so maybe they're de-emphasizing arts, right, or journalism in high schools. Those things are being impacted by the lack of funding for our public schools, and so certainly educator salary is part of our message that we have to adequately pay educators in order to ensure we have the highest quality teachers in classrooms. But it's also not just about teachers, it's about bus drivers. We've had a lot of districts really struggle with even finding bus drivers to transport kids to and from school. It's about the resources available for our classrooms. It's about, having up-to-date textbooks. It's about ensuring that we have enough school counselors or social workers or psychologists.
The idea was floated of a statewide minimum salary for teachers, and that's not something that's currently being pursued at the legislature. Would you like to see that revisited?
We live in a local control state, so I don't have a lot of faith that a bill like that would make it through the state legislature. So, I think it's worth having the conversation, but when you look at those states who even have a minimum salary schedule, the vast majority of those have not been updated in over 2 decades, right? There's nothing to steadily increase that, so it's still going to come down to a local control decision.
So, with that in mind, why not have these rallies in local communities, at school board meetings, the places where these numbers are actually set?
Would you be interviewing me today if we didn't have a couple of rallies planned that are going to bring 10,000 people in?
Zero chance. Last I checked, Colorado's teachers are some of the lowest paid in America. I think I saw a figure of around $46,000, places it's like 4th or 5th from the bottom. What should the average teacher salary in Colorado be, if not where it is now, around $46,000?
Well, it's not so much about the average teaching salary. Definitely we want to see that improve, but we have starting teacher salaries in this state that begin at $29,000. And when you factor in the increased cost of housing and medical care and the fact that many of those starting educators have pretty big student loans to pay back, it's a real problem for even getting somebody through the door and into the career. We certainly would like to see starting salaries, creep up closer to the $40,000 mark. We think that's more comparable and fair to educators, and it's certainly comparable to professionals in similar professions.
How did we get where we are today with teacher salaries in Colorado? You'll hear people blame the taxing structure and taxpayer bill of rights and so on and so forth. Or are there decisions being made in local communities where they're simply placing a value on the value of a teacher that you folks disagree with?
No, I don't think that's it at all. I think what we're seeing is a return to zip codes determining your worth. And when some local communities can raise a lot of local tax dollars to backfill what the state isn't providing. Others cannot. And, we've seen that several times play out in Brighton 27J School District, which, just this past fall attempted to pass a mill levy to pay for an increase in operating costs. And they were unsuccessful. And I think that was the third time that they had tried and failed. There are some communities in Colorado that have been unsuccessful year after year after year. And, it's not fair to put it on a local community to fix a constitutional problem. I think long term, Colorado's got to tackle the constitutional issues that are impacting our public schools and other important services in the state.
There is an eye-catching bill being pushed by some Republicans at the state capitol right now, which would make it illegal for teachers to strike in Colorado. It's difficult for them to strike right now, but it would make it illegal. We're talking about firing, fines, possible jail time. It's not going to pass, but what do you think this is about?
Well, I think the message is clearly a threat to educators who are voicing their opinions in support of quality public education for all students. It definitely is an attack on educators' First Amendment rights, and it's something that, while it may not pass, we're definitely going to make sure that our state Senate will hear from us and from our members.
What do you say to folks who are critical of the methodology? The idea of a mass rally at the Capitol, which is causing a lot of school districts to close on Thursday or Friday, puts a burden on families, especially low-income families, to find childcare for that day if the district cancels class.
Yeah. That's a great question. I would say no educator planning to come down here wants to be here instead of the classroom. Everyone would prefer to be in the classroom next Thursday and Friday, but as educators, we feel compelled to make sure that our elected representatives hear our voice for our students. I mean, ultimately, the beneficiaries of the actions we're taking now will be the students of Colorado.
We've seen statewide political action by teachers in a lot of other places, in Oklahoma and Arizona and West Virginia. Some of those states, you've seen statewide teacher strikes. The rules in Colorado basically would not allow that to happen. Teachers would have to take work action district by district. There's a cooling off period where the state can come in and mediate things. But do you think we are going to see more actions like that in Colorado over the next year?
I think that's entirely dependent on what happens in the state legislature. I think it, may be partially influenced with what happens with Initiative 93, Great Schools, Thriving Communities, and that ballot measure. It's not our intent or preference to call for a statewide strike, but we have to do something about this funding issue in our public schools. And, going after educators and threatening to jail them for actions taken under Senate Bill 264 is wrong. We want to listen. We want people to listen to educators. I mean, that's how we fix systems, is we talk to the people who are actually doing the work in the classrooms.
And I think you would hear from some folks at the legislature, split control this year. They have to operate in some ways by consensus. They have found some more money for education. Do you recognize that that's a step in the right direction, or do you consider it such a pittance that they shouldn't get credit for it?
Well, should they get credit for the buy down of $150 million of the negative factor? Absolutely, they should get credit for that. But that does not excuse the last 9 years of underfunding our public schools. And even with that $150 million buy-in or buy down, we're still going to have around $650 million of a negative factor. So one of the things we really want the legislature to do is to commit to a date certain when they will pay their IOU to our public schools. And we would like that to be within the next 4 years by 2022.
I want to revisit something that you were talking about just a moment ago, and I want to try to get some clarity on it. When you talked about the idea of a statewide teacher strike like we're seeing in other states right now, is that impossible in Colorado, difficult in Colorado, improbable in Colorado, or possible if the right things happen? Can you explain that to me?
I think it's fairly improbable. We have a number of school districts who have negotiated contracts, and we certainly would not support bad faith bargaining with those districts. And so even right now with our days of action, our employee groups and associations have been working to ensure that the actions they're taking are consistent with their contracts.
Last question. Can I ask you about the governor's race? So CA has endorsed Cary Kennedy, Democratic candidate for governor, who has said education is her top priority, wants to do a lot of the things that you've talked about here. There are two Democratic candidates in the race, former State Senator Mike Johnston and Congressman Jared Polis, who have supported some education reforms opposed by your membership and by your union. Would you be comfortable supporting either of those two men if they become the Democratic nominee?
That is a difficult question to answer. We have a process whereby our members representing both parties would interview the candidates and determine whether or not there was one that they wanted to support. Right now, through our interview process, we've determined that Cary Kennedy is most aligned with our values and the needs of public school students across Colorado.
Kerrie Dallman, thank you so much for your time, and we'll look forward to hearing from teachers later this week.
Thank you very much.